I am Captain Randy Cramer, United States Marine Corps Special Section, Covert Military Space Program arm of the Marine Corps.
How about we start off with what some of the projects you're working on? Can you comment about your regeneration beds?
Sure. The holobed project is, we're still in a planning stage. So my chief engineer and my business partner and I are in the, call it a final stage of venture capital that should get taken care of sometime this year. So that's about all. I don't necessarily want to say a bunch more than that until we have more to talk about, but let's just say that it is a project that continues to slowly, move along. We've been having issues mostly over the last few years getting venture capitalists to take the project seriously without an immediate short-term return on investment, which is what most everybody wants. But you kind of have to tell people that to develop something like this at the R&D phase, like no one's going to make any money from that. So people have to be willing to support the project without getting paid back right away, because that's just not how this part of the project works. The manufacturing phase is when people get paid back. So,
is it possible that maybe very wealthy individuals can purchase time in the regen bed to re-age themselves to help fund the project?
Well, we're certainly open to discussing that possibility. But at this point, the people that we've talked to who've wanted to drop, as individuals, who've wanted to drop large chunks of funding, don't just want time in the holobed, they want one of their own, and that's not an option.
Will the med bed be able to regenerate, say, eye tissue? Or
anything. Can regenerate anything. Eye tissue, ear tissue, brain tissue, skin tissue, organ tissue, internal organ tissue, anything and everything. It was originally an Arcturan technology that we were purchasing from them until we could develop it ourselves, until we could essentially replicate the manufacturing ourselves. So when I was in the military, a lot of the holobed units that we used were actually manufactured off-world. They weren't necessarily ones that we make, but we definitely understand the manufacturing process now that we make our own for covert military space program activities, which is separate than what we're trying to do as a civilian operation to build them.
Can you become younger than 21?
You technically can be, but it's a technology that we're not going to want to do that with people, because in our test studies or special section within the test studies on such technology find that when you age reversed someone or recondition them to back when they're in their teens or their 20s, they tend to, you have a percentage anyway of people who go through that process who tend to start behaving like irresponsible adolescents again. So we kind of don't want to heap upon giving people a reason to behave more irresponsibly by looking in the mirror and going, woo, I'm 21 again, let's start drinking. And then people start reliving the mistakes of their 20s because they think they're in their 20s again, which they kind of are. So, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee that people are going to act in their best maturity and all of a sudden be a mature person in a 21-year-old body. They tend to become immature people in 21-year-old bodies. So our policy will not be to age reverse people pretty much, under 40. This particular technology uses your genetic profile and restores cellular tissue to your genetic profile. It doesn't alter your genetic profile or give room to change your genetics at all. It uses your own genetic profile and will cause the cells in your body to simply conform and recondition themselves to your own genetic profile. So no purple hair. You can dye it purple, but can't make it that way just for fun. Not using this tech.
So would you ever consider possibly doing a collab with Jared Rand and one of his medbed technologies, or maybe work?
I've listened to him. I was in a conference call not too long listening to him discuss his, what he's calling it, the consciousness chamber, something like that. I mean, we're just, as far as his project and my project, we're dealing with fairly non-congruent technologies, so I'm not sure how they would work together, to be honest with you. His unit seems to be a standalone unit, and so more power to him to be able to make that work. And our unit is scalable, to mean we'll be able to make it different sizes. So yeah, I just don't think that his technology and my technology are congruent necessarily to warrant collaboration. Special section medical personnel have this technology and some even more advanced things that they can do to restore cellular tissue in the body and heal people from different things, but they definitely have working versions of this, yeah. They wouldn't be able to use any units that they have right now because they're signed on to secrecy agreements that would create a violation of the Espionage Act for them to do that. So if anybody on the command staff, anybody in the intelligence staff, anybody in the medical staff handed me a schematic, a blueprint, a piece of technology, we'd all be in violation of the Espionage Act. But because I'm developing, essentially reverse engineering this, from the point of view of a civilian company, we can slide through the loophole, as it were, of not having to worry about the Espionage Act because no one's technically handing me a piece of classified information, which is what would happen if someone handed me a blueprint, a schematic, or a piece of hardware to replicate.
That also applies to any kind of photos, because some people are requesting proof.
Good for them. I mean, people can request proof all that they want until we have a civilian prototype to show people, yeah, then people don't get to see proof. Sorry. That's the way it works. But, once we've got a civilian prototype, believe me, people will know we've got it because we'll make it work.
Okay, great. Can you comment on, because you've talked about your experiences on Mars. Was Mars the only planet that you were stationed on, or did you have any other experiences, perhaps on the moon?
I mean, I've did training on the moon, been back and forth to the moon a few times, but didn't really live there, wasn't really stationed there. Was stationed on Mars in the MDF and stationed on a ship when I was a pilot. And have, been around the solar system, but never really lived or been stationed on another planet or another satellite.
What is the name of the moon base?
Lunar Operations Command. What I can remember of it being inside of it, it's a pretty big facility. It's multiple levels. I remember going up and down an elevator, multiple levels, multiple floors to go to different sections. What I thought was interesting about it was I was expecting to see all of this super modern, high-tech construction and hardware, like it was all, built from the future, when the truth is it's all built decades in the past. And so you actually have some sections that appear pretty old. So when I had to sign my contract in the admin section, there was lots of this faded, worn yellow carpet and lots of these sort of mustard yellow and avocado green furniture, like you would if you're old enough and you remember a dentist's office or a doctor's office in the 70s and you remember that furniture and you remember that color carpet, then you know that it's incredibly dated to that time period. And the entire admin section was just all dated in this 1970s decor that was old and faded and, to be honest, needed an upgrade. But yeah, it was fascinating to me that it wasn't all as modern as I was just expecting it to be. A lot of it just looks older because it was built decades ago. They haven't bothered to remodel some of it, I guess. I don't ever recall seeing any Zeta personnel. New Schwabenlanders, every once in a while we see, officers or personnel or state personnel from New Schwabenland occasionally, but not a lot. Those were not the main personnel that I saw when I was there. English was still the more common spoken language among everyone. My understanding is that it's funded by funded through the military, through the ICC, through some private banking and private family money, but it's essentially a military base and a military operations center for the covert military space program fleet. So most of their money is coming either from the military budget that they get, which again is mostly comes from the ICC and the conglomerate of countries that make up the EDF, or Earth Defense Force. There is the military base there, and then we have what has been referred to me as a living colony, meaning that there are people who live there permanently full time, but I don't know if it's right to say that they're colonists as if they're a part of that colony and they could never leave, or they're always going to be colonists. I don't know that that's correct. So, but it's still referred to as a living colony because there's a number of people who do actually live there full time. But I think that's just under or just over about 200,000 people, but I don't know the exact number.
So is there like cable TV from planet Earth, like CNN, piped in?
I think that has to do with rank. If you have enough rank and position, then you get access to the internet, cable, media, presentations and so forth, access to downloadable streaming movies and so forth. I mean, I think it has more to do with rank and position than it does anything else. So the higher level you have, the more access you have to that sort of thing. The lower level you have, the less access you have to those sorts of things.
So it is possible some of these officers could possibly be on Facebook, even messaging you.
Yeah, it's totally possible. They could certainly be on Facebook. They could certainly be messaging each other with a system of coding. They could be using their own websites to communicate with each other. They could be using the dark web to communicate with each other. But yeah, they could just be right out in the open on Facebook too. The medical technology, when I was in the medical unit, was pretty sophisticated. It was pretty advanced. So, but most of that was just diagnostic equipment. So I don't remember seeing them have like a cellular regenerator. But if they did, might have just been in a different room that we didn't have access to, because that's not what we were there for. We were mostly there for a full major checkup. So the diagnostics machines seemed like that would make more sense why we were exposed to the diagnostic machines and not some other type of machinery, but it's all pretty advanced. The full body scanner is actually really similar to the ones that people go through at the airport. So you basically stand in a glass booth and the scanner swivels around, but then it does this deep tissue cellular level scan of your entire body, tells you all kinds of things that are going on in there. When we landed there, we pulled into a hangar bay, down an elevator, into a hangar which had easily dozens, if not hundreds of ships lined up, stacked up really. So they weren't necessarily out in rows. They were in these stacked up almost like in shelving cubbies, but that were big enough to hold a spaceship. So it was more like the hangar itself went down quite a ways. It's not so much that it went to the left or to the right quite a ways, so that most everything again was sort of stacked in these cubbies up and down each other on like a internal skyscraper, like a giant internal parking garage. I mean, not sure how else to describe it, but I would say that it was at least 10 to 15 stories high or deep, depending on, again, how you're looking at it. And the portion that I could see from end to end was probably no more than 100, 150 meters in diameter.
And what kind of spaceships did you see in there?
Mostly TR-3Bs or 3Gs, if you were talking about the newer versions, but not exclusively. There were some other unique styled craft, meaning they weren't types of craft that I'd say, oh, I've seen 15 of those, I know what that is. Some of them were fairly unique looking, and I don't know that I'd ever seen a make or model of that type before. Most of them looked like they were from here. They were terrestrially made. A couple of them, though, questionable. Could have been extraterrestrial in origin, could have been made somewhere Could be a private vehicle that was purchased or built by someone for a specific purpose or specific reason.
Can you describe what the inside of these the TR3B or G series looks like inside?
Well, the older series basically are like a military aircraft on the inside. So anyone who's ever been inside like a military plane, the internal rigging, the chairs, straps, bulkheads, flooring, it's all pretty much standard military contractor stuff. So a lot of what the inside of an older TR unit, Black Manta, looks like an older military plane on the inside. The newer ones, like the new ones, are super shiny from what I understand. I mean, they're all made of like carbon fiber and more advanced materials. They're super shiny, they look like a spaceship on the inside. Like if you stepped inside of one, you would not be mistaken that you were in a modern, futuristic styled spaceship, as opposed to some of the older ones that you get on board. You expect you're going to be in this fancy spaceship and you're just like, what? This is just like a military cargo plane. Because they are. Most of them, the older ones, were just like internal military cargo planes.
Did you ever see any of these submarine shaped craft? Looks like a cylinder.
I mean, the carrier that I was stationed on, the Nautilus, was definitely like that. It's, mile, give or take, in length, and definitely cylinder shaped. Trying to think what else to say about them other than that they were like a long toilet paper tube with a slightly flattened top.
Could they actually land inside that base, the Lunar Operations Command?
Oh, not that I'm aware of. No, those things are too big. So you have shuttles that go back and forth and so forth. Now, I don't know where they manufacture all of those, but supposedly, there's some kind of a manufacturing facility where they, like a shipping yard, where they're able to conceal the vehicles in a hangar or in something that's some kind of a covered structure, an underground facility that might have some kind of gigantic doors that open up or close. But not having seen one of those, I couldn't say, but I'm aware that such a things exist. So the EDF has a flag that it flies, which is like a bluish gray flag with a gold fringe, a gold trim on it, that has a rocket ship with a little swirl on it and a couple of stars positioned on the swirl. So it's kind of like the insignia that's on the patch too. Trying to think what else, if there's anything that it says on the flag. Not that I can recall. I mean, there's some markings on it, but it's basically just the EDF, Naval Space Command unification flag, whatever that is for. So,
did you see any American flags there?
Depending on uniforms of personnel, every once in a while you would see a nationality flag like you do on a regular military uniform, but sometimes people would be in, say, a homogenized uniform, but could end up with different nationality flags on their shoulders. So someone from the United States could be wearing the exact same uniform as someone who's from the Russian military, but they're going to have a nationality patch that's going to be a flag that's appropriate. That's kind of how you can tell where people are from. So the other uniforms are usually the same.
Are there any civilians in this base, or is it all?
Oh yeah, no, it's definitely some civilian contractors as well who also work there. So it's not 100% military personnel. There's some banking personnel, corporate personnel, and whatever civilian administrators, civilian contractors that they pay.
Can you comment on where the crafts are commuting from planet Earth, I'm assuming? Or I guess they probably go in a lot more places than planet Earth.
Yeah, I mean, they're headed out into the solar system and back and forth to the planet, to Earth as well. So, yeah. I mean, there's a number of bases and facilities on planet Earth where those ships can come and go from. I mean, hundreds of them.
And can you describe the difference between Solar Warden and Radiant Guardian?
Sure. So, in the same way here in America that we have, the Navy divides into a couple of different fleets, like we have an Atlantic fleet and a Pacific fleet, because it would be too many ships with too great a distances to manage if you put all of those vehicles and all of that personnel under one fleet command. So dividing up the space fleet into Solar Warden and Radiant Guardian is the equivalent of having an Atlantic fleet and a Pacific fleet. So there's this arbitrary line drawn through the middle of the solar system. Radiant Guardian gets one side, Solar Warden gets the other side, so that if they have to respond to something, they don't have to go all the way across the solar system, just part of the way across the solar system on their particular half.
In our last interview, you mentioned that some of these craft were trading beer and children's clothing. Where do they actually pick that up here on planet Earth? The drop-off points.
Right. So there are import-export companies who are given the responsibility of fulfilling the contracts that we have with these other species. So let's just say that one of these import-export companies gets a contract that says they have to get 500,000 units of beer and 1 million units of children's clothing over the next 6 months. So that company is going to make the purchases for those units of beer and for those units of children's clothing from around the world. They'll spread it out. They won't just call up one manufacturer and have them, fill the order from one company. They'll spread the order out to multiple companies, multiple corporations around the world, multiple other suppliers, import exporters, and then depending on how exactly which location they're flying out of, they will then send all of that product in a shipping container or a series of shipping containers that they'll ship to either their landing pad at Diego Garcia. There's another one that's in the Canary Islands, and then there's another one that's way out in the middle of the Pacific, out in the middle of nowhere. I'm not sure what the name of the island that is, but they're fairly remote locations that don't have lots of people standing around taking pictures with their phones or their cameras, and they're fairly remote. But I don't know where all those locations are, but that's basically how it's done.
I'm not sure if it was William Tompkins who said this, but some of these crafts are actually manufactured in a facility under the Wasatch Mountains in Utah.
Yeah,
that facility.
Yeah, I mean that we definitely have manufacturing facilities that we make ships here on terrestrial soil, and certainly in the United States of America here. Most of the facilities that we have here that are our remote construction facilities are anywhere from sort of Nevada to New Mexico to Arizona to Utah, that whole sort of southwest desert region. A lot of wide open space there. The ICC does not own the LOC. ICC funds the LOC, but from my understanding, LOC is managed, operated, and run by the military. That's my understanding.
Do you have an idea what the budget is to keep the Lunar Operations Command running each year, the annual operation budget?
To be honest, I think it's not that high. I think that their annual operating budget is less than $1 billion a year. Yeah, it's pretty economical from what I understand. As long as they don't have to add like a bunch of new construction or a bunch of new technology, just making sure everyone's paid, that they've got enough infrastructure, food, water.
What was the kind of computing technology they had at the LOC?
Something I'm not privileged to. I mean, I never got to sit down and type at a computer. I've seen other people do it. So to be honest, the computers that they used didn't look much more sophisticated than desktop computers that we were using a couple decades ago or at the time. So I don't know if the standard PC that was being used on the desk of an admin bureaucrat was much different than, the IBM PCs that were floating around at the time, or Apple PCs were floating around at the time. Not saying they didn't have more sophisticated computing technology than that, but not that I got to see. It's my understanding it is owned, managed, operated by the military. Depending on how you want to break down covert military space program management and umbrellas of who's managing what, yeah, that does become a vague answer. Because again, it's a cooperation of many other smaller agencies, so that are, I'm sure that they're operating under a unified command structure. That's pretty much the way we do things, but I'm not sure what they identify that command as. If it's, it might be actually U.S. Spacecom, but maybe not.
Did you happen to see any biodomes on the moon with life forms and trees and forests?
Not where I was at. So I was pretty much not anywhere near the surface or any of the living colony facilities. So pretty much everywhere I was at was underground, fairly deep, in either the medical, the admin, or some other section.
Did you happen to see any of the jump rooms?
Not on the moon, no. We had them when I was in the MDF on Mars many years later, but I'd never seen the jump rooms on the moon. Oh, I wasn't really stationed on the moon. The moon was more of a transfer station. So anyone who's ever gone through induction into the military knows you go to a processing center. They give you a medical, you fill out your contract, you sign your contract, they give you a packet with your contract in it, and then put you on a bus or a plane to your duty station. So pretty much the same thing, except we're at Lunar Operations Command, but you still have to go to medical, get a medical background, medical checkup, a psych eval, sign the contract, and you get a packet with your contract in it, and then they put us on a bigger ship, on a spaceship, and then that ship went through a wormhole to Mars, and then from there we had our packet scanned, and then that told us where we were going. So again, anyone who's been through normal military induction, it's a very similar process. It's just happening at a different place on a different scale, and you don't take a bus to your duty station, you take a spaceship. But then once we got to Ares Primus, which is the headquarters for the MDF and the Mars colonies, we did get sent to our duty station, which in my case was Forward Station Zebra, on something that was not unlike a bus. It was just an atomic-powered hovering bus. So it was kind of like still getting there by bus.
Where is Lunar Operations Command on the moon?
On the dark side. I mean, I don't have a map for me to like point out and say it's here, but it's on the dark side somewhere. Ares Primus, it's, again, I can't say exactly where because I don't have a map to show me where it is, but it's somewhere near the equator. But I'm not exactly sure where. No one ever pointed it out to me on a map that then I could go, oh, there it is. Like, I've just been there.
Thomas Alvin, who said that he was in one of these programs 20 years back, said there were native Martians on Mars that actually looked human, and they had like an olive-colored skin.
I've heard of that. I've never met them. So of what I'm told are about the 5 species that are indigenous to Mars, I've met 2 of them. The indigenous insectoids and indigenous reptoids, but I've heard that there are a few other species, including a humanoid species that looks a lot like us, but that I've never met. So I've heard of them, but never met them.
Tony Rodriguez said that one of these insectoids bit off his hand. Did you happen to have an experience like that? Was it positive or negative?
Well, I mean, we engaged with them in regular combat operations. So, I mean, most of our interaction with them was hostile. However, there were also some interactions that were not hostile. So, they're, as a species, I wouldn't say that they tend to be aggressive. They tend to be more defensive. So, I think most of their military reaction to us had a lot more to do with our aggression level than it had to do with their aggression level. The indigenous reptoids, on the other hand, have a high aggression level, so it's a little bit more difficult to say who punched who in the face first there. But probably when you're talking about the insectoids, we probably punched them in the face first to get the whole thing started.
Can you comment about some of the gear that you would wear on the surface?
Sure. I mean, it was 2 body armors, a full body heavy body armor and powered environment suit. So it has like an exosuit with hydraulics in the arms and the legs. And then there was a light body armor which did not have the hydraulics in it, but did grant some greater maneuverability. So depending on the operation, would depend on whether we get suited up in the heavy or the light armor. And then the railgun was a magnetically propelled railgun. For people who know what that is, if you don't know what that is, series of electromagnets that go down the barrel, grabs a metal projectile and then accelerates through a magnetic field of turning on and off the magnets in rapid succession that send it flying out of the barrel very, very fast with no kick that a chemical explosion weapon has. So you get this very clean, straight shot. Which was called the Tycho series. So it was depending on which version of the rifle we would have, it would be the Tycho something, 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 usually a 3-number series after that. It was super quiet, super quiet. I mean, it doesn't make much noise other than the projectile flying down the barrel and coming out of the barrel itself, which again is fairly quiet. So certainly when you're thinking about gunfire and how loud gunfire is, these things are super quiet by comparison. You can hear the projectile cutting through the air before you really hear the gun itself make a noise.
Do you think DARPA has its hands on technology like this already?
Yeah, absolutely they do. I mean, most of the technology probably came from, they're doing research, or for the most part, a lot of this stuff originally. So yeah, whatever they say they're working on or they have is decades behind whatever they're actually working on or developing right now. That technology gets released, disseminated into the regular military as, some generals with lots of stars on their shoulders at the DoD get to decide and make the decision-making process on. So keeping in mind that, yeah, we want to have our military with the best equipment possible, but we don't want everyone else's military to steal our best ideas. So if we rolled out this really amazing technology, like other people would steal it more, and then all of a sudden, everybody would have full-powered hydraulic body armor and railguns. So by not rolling out that advanced technology, they're also preventing other people from stealing that technology. So it's catch-22 a bit. Directed energy like rifles were not what we used. I have heard people talk about them. I've heard people talk about a pistol that shoots off this intense electrical charge, and I've heard people talk about a plasma rifle that fires off a concentrated ball of plasma that's kind of maintained an electromagnetic field that then flies away from the rifle. But we never used them. But I've heard people talk about them. So the body armor, again, was a full-powered hydraulic body armor that had, so you could jump farther for sure, run faster, hit harder, pick up larger objects and throw them if necessary. I mean, it definitely had to concentrate some oxygen and pump it into a system that was regulating pretty quickly so that the oxygen CO2 levels were maintained in a pretty tight stasis. because you don't want your CO2 levels to get too high or your oxygen levels to get too high either, actually. So you want them maintained at, you want your oxygen level maintained right around 17%.
Now, could you comment a little bit about Project Moonshadow and what that is?
Sure. Project Moonshadow was the project which I was originally developed under. So when I was genetically engineered and put into a training program as a child, that was Project Moonshadow. So that was the program that built me, engineered me, put me together, and trained me. It was responsibility for my training until I was 17 years old and I was deployed. I've got a few implants, so technically, but I mean, I think that most people, even internally within the covert space program, think of cyborgs as being people who have had a lot more machine augmentations than a few implants. So even though technically a few implants can make you be thought of as a cyborg, we would still sort of say I didn't have enough machinery attached to me to qualify as being an actual cyborg, whatever that distinction is about.
Can you comment a little bit about the method of how they actually created super soldiers using less trauma on Project Moonshadow compared to maybe like the Monarch trauma?
Yeah, I mean, certainly part of the main way in which that is done is instilling in the prospective soldier a sense of defensiveness, loyalty, and commitment to family, community, and planet and species, so that you're essentially really sort of trained both physically, mentally, and emotionally in what is really a fairly altruistic method, so that your drive is not just to follow orders and kill people at the snap of a finger. Your drive is to defend and protect using all strength, cunning, and ability that you have, which gives you a lot more free will. So instead of, again, just being a kind of organic robot following orders, you're given looser parameters and expected to use your own drive to protect and defend, to follow those orders, if that makes any sense. I sort of joke around when I say that I was made in a petri dish. I can't necessarily say that it was an actual petri dish, but yeah, I mean, we were all engineered and built in the laboratory. So yeah, we were a form of test tube baby, as it were, by being generated in the lab. So they take a genetic sample from my mom, genetic sample from my dad, put that together, then take the nucleus of that bundle of cells, open it up, pluck out the DNA codons that they want to change, put in extraterrestrial DNA where they want enhancements, wad that back up, stick it back in the nuclei of the cell, then implant that into my mom, and then I was born 9 months later.
How does that method compare, not using torture, compared to, say, using the trauma-based mind control that went on in Monarch or Montauk? Like the long-term results?
Yeah, well, I mean, definitely the long-term results are, less behavioral problems, less psychotic breaks, less violence. So, we tend to not just want to randomly hit people in the head with beer bottles and things like that from having this sort of with the grain training technology that was used to train us. So sort of healthier mental state, healthier emotional state, not prone to random acts of violence, just kind of higher rates of mental and emotional stability, really, to be honest with you, as well as physical health and well-being.
And do you see a trend within the secret space program going more in that direction of less trauma?
From what I'm being told, that the newer, most recent generation of soldiers that are going through these programs as children right now, that they have completely done away with the trauma-based mind control system because they are seeing that it's just not effective for what they want.
Do you recall ever spending time in something that could be described as a trip seat, according to Barry King, where they would erase memories and move memories around. Instant education machines as well.
Yeah, I mean, in that case, yeah. I mean, there are certainly machines that we would sit in that had the ability to download, kinesthetic memory and information, training information that we would then turn into field training exercises and so forth. That's for sure. But I don't recall, and maybe this is part of the issue here, I don't recall too much messing with my memory until I was done with my tour of duty and they repressed the memories that I had. So I can remember remembering a lot up until that point, if that helps or makes any sense. So we were sent back to Lunar Operations Command for debriefing, what they call mind wipe and an age reversal, even though age reversals in this case isn't really an age reversal. They hatch out a fresh clone, transfer your consciousness, spirit, soul consciousness from one body into another body, into a younger version of yourself, and then repress the memories so that you get sent back home. I can remember waking up the next morning in my bed and sitting up and having this recollection. It's like, oh, I just had this dream that went on for months and months and months, and then it was like, oh, it's gone. And then got up, looked in the mirror, and was like, oh, I'm in my bed, I'm 17 again, it's 1987. Oh, okay, all right, that's where we're at. So believe me, your brain and your body want to come to complete acceptance of what it sees in a situation like that. So even if there was more residual memory left over at that point, my brain would not want to struggle with resisting that impulse to just be like, oh, here I am again, 17, it's 1987 again, okay, I'm good. Like, the brain resists any notion that something different is going on than what's happening around you at the moment.
Do they have to continue to give you injections or some kind of serums to keep your memory suppressed?
Not that I'm aware of. I think that the implants that I was given were supposed to do that job for them. So there are some cerebral implants that are designed to divert the thinking process. So thinking that moves towards memory retrieval or moves towards things that might trigger memory retrieval is sort of automatically diverted with the cerebral implants. So there was a lot of years when I felt like, my brain was just going left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, as far as what felt like not so much my ability to focus or maintain a decision-making process as feeling like just kind of being pulled around from place to place mentally and emotionally in a way that seemed outside of my own cognitive will. So it was a weird, decade or so and a half before I started recovering and recalling my memories and getting what I would say was a solid control of my brain and my mind and my consciousness back. We're told how the process was supposed to end. The addition of that is we were told, don't worry, your benefits will be covered, you'll get a nice cushy government job, you'll be fine, we got you covered. So there's a lot of promises about what's going to happen after you get discharged, but once they suppress your memory and age reverse you, they don't have to do anything. They just send you back right where they took you from and say, there you go, enjoy the rest of your life.
So what did they promise you what they would give you?
Cushy government job, basically that I immediately, so that I would have to not do much and collect my paycheck and have good insurance and health care taken care of for the foreseeable future. So, yeah.
That only seems to be the case for upper management in the ICC.
Yeah. Some of those people actually do probably get a job when they come back.
How old are you?
Well, there's virtual age and actual age. My virtual age is how I look, what I appear to be in this physical body. So my physical body, even though I get told I don't look my age, would appear to be 48. My actual age, I'm going to be turning 83 this year. So you have to add in the 20-year tour of duty plus over a decade of the period when I was in training. So there's over 30 years of extra time and experience that I participated in that my body doesn't show because I was put back into a younger version of myself when I was 37. So my brigadier general is one of the generals on the command staff of United States Marine Corps Special Section. He and I have been having regular conversations, and I get regular briefings from him a couple times a week. So we've been communicating very close for the past 6, 7, almost 8 years now. I am actually not allowed to know his actual age, like most of the generals on the command staff. Once they get over 100, they stop talking about like how old they are. And some of that has to do with apparently mental attitude. So we kind of know that as people are growing older, if they believe and feel younger, they will tend to stay younger. People who age quickly are often aging quickly because they're saying to themselves, oh, I'm feeling so old, right? So if you're over 100, even if you have technology that makes you feel and look younger, like if you still go around saying, oh, I'm 115 this year, like that kind of thing is going to make you feel older and work against the technology keeping you younger. So I guess once you're over 100, you just don't talk about it anymore. So, but he was an officer during World War II. So if that gives you some idea of his age, but he's over 100. Because we've only been using it on people for so many decades, that's the extension that we've gotten for personnel now, but the theoretical numbers are centuries longer. I mean, maybe you can get someone to live over 1,000 years, but we from what we understand and what we've done so far and what our extraterrestrial friends and neighbors tell us, yeah, we think it's going to be pretty straightforward to get people living 4, 5, 6, 7, 800 years using this technology.
Now, you said that you were placed into a new clone body.
Correct.
Did you ever see any of these cloning vats?
I've never seen them. No, I've heard people talk about them, but I've never actually seen them. So I was unconscious for the process. So there's not much more I can tell people about that actual process because I was not conscious for it.
So why didn't they just use your physical vessel to re-age it? Why would they want to just use the clone?
There's different reasons for that. And some of that has to do with things that you've learned in that body, things that you've experienced in that body. Supposedly there is some reduction of the physiological and cellular trauma. I don't necessarily feel like there's a reduction, but then again, it could be much worse. So, maybe if I was in my original body, I would even feel worse about all of that than I do. So hard for me to judge that, but there's supposed to be some reasons that are good for me, some reasons that are good for them. So
I also think it's the cellular memory is still stuck in there. You would get memory recall a lot faster.
I think that has a lot to do with it, yeah. So trying to drag out the memory repression process has a lot to do with it, I think.
Why don't you share your experience with the Insectoids?
Well, so like I said, we primarily engaged with them militarily at first. Their typical MO in combat is to send out swarms of other genetically engineered insects. So fighting the insectoids is primarily fighting off swarms of giant insects, which is no fun at all. Absolutely no fun at all. But there was a time when a small squad was on a patrol and we were going by the front of one of their hives, and there were some of them outside milling around, sort of doing something functional with some boxes or something that they were bringing outside. And it just kind of struck me that since we kind of knew from running into them in smaller groups that if we were not perceived as a threat, we would often just be ignored, even if we were in a visual range. Unlike the reptoids, if we were in a visual range of the reptoids and we were in just about, unless we outnumbered them vastly, that was going to start a fight. But with the insectoids, we could be relatively close to them in a small group and they would not perceive us as a threat and would therefore not attack. So there is one particular day in which I sort of just felt deeply inclined and compelled to walk up to them and see if I could just start a conversation, and did start a conversation, and essentially was the beginning point of a contact relationship with them. So then we had an exchange program that was about 6 months long, in which several officers from the Ambassadorial Corps, several officers from our facility, and a few enlisted personnel who accompanied those officers on a daily basis for about 6 months to this insectoid hive, which I got to be a part of that team. So I spent like almost 6 months every day going back and forth and having these all I can say is sort of very calm, orderly, very pleasant conversations and interactions with them. So again, they're not overtly aggressive, they're more defensive. So once we really got to know them personally, they were really quite friendly. They were quite nice, super smart, super dedicated workers. They work 22 hours out of a 24-hour day pretty much. But yeah, I mean, but they're also insects. They're really different than us. We're mammals, they're insects. There's a lot of characteristics that are just really different, but we were certainly able to communicate and get along and have a positive interaction from that experience. They were mostly what I would think of as sort of a deep brown or an almost black color, kind of like a dark colored black ant. So if you came home and one was standing there waiting for you in your living room just to say hi, you'd probably crap your pants, right? I mean, just because seeing that up close, it would be shocking. You'd probably crap your pants. If someone, if a spaceship landed and 5 or 6 of these guys came out, even again if they were not being threatening, it would probably just be terrifying because they're giant freaking insects. I mean, that's plays with your brain a little bit. So, but they're quite friendly, when you're not being aggressive towards them. But they're a giant insect. I mean, they're kind of creepy. Like if there was a giant insect in the room with you, you would probably, unless you really love bugs, man, like you're going to be like, that's kind of creepy. Like they're a little creepy. I did my best to get used to them, but to be honest, I had a bit of an insect phobia for years after, combat operations with them. So it took me a while to get over that, really. They did occasionally go into battle using a plasma rifle that was basically like a lightning gun. So fires out a plasma beam, which is sort of like a bolt of lightning as opposed to like a plasma ball or something like that. But no, they did not wear clothing or uniforms. They're buck naked, or they're wearing their exoskeleton on the outside. So, which I think is an interesting subpoint. They think we're gross because we have our insides on the outside. So we essentially they have an exoskeleton with all their guts on the inside and all their muscles on the inside. We have a skeleton on the inside and we wear all of our meat on the outside. They think that's gross. Ooh, humans, they've got all their insides on their outsides. Ooh.
Do they actually communicate that to you? Or
not in so many words, but you do get this when you're having the psionic communication with them. Every once in a while you can just get this feeling that they're just like, think how weird it is that we are the opposite of them, and that's kind of grosses them out. For the most part, now we would go visit them, we would be wearing our external body armor, which then to them is like us having exoskeleton. So that is actually more comfortable for them to be, for us to be wearing our external body armor, because then we're wearing an exoskeleton like they're wearing an exoskeleton, and all our insides are tucked inside. But when we're just wearing sort of normal clothing, they think it's kind of gross. I think that's hilarious.
Can you describe the spirituality of these insects?
Well, they certainly had a metaphysical, psionic, spiritual connection with the planet that they lived on. And they believed that it was a parent-child type of relationship, that they viewed the planet as their great mother, and had a deeply intense relationship with what I would say was a deep spiritual relationship, which demonstrates itself in a way in which they definitely are in harmony with their environment and the planet that they live on. So they're not spending time, ejecting poisons or toxic gases or smoke from industrialization into the air. They don't pollute the water. They don't pollute the ground. They consider that taking care of the environment that they live in is how the environment that they live in takes care of them. So they feel like this symbiotic relationship with their environment and their planet in that way. That's very practical, but at the same time is, in their own way, deeply spiritual to them. They're a very intellectual species, meaning they're sort of really left brain when you want to think about it, but that doesn't mean that they have no emotions, or that they have no sense of feeling or spirituality. It just means that it would seem to be much less than what we experience, but in my experience, it was still a central part of their existence. So if you started talking about things that, like, what really mattered, at some point you're going to have a conversation about their metaphysical spiritual belief system and their connection with their planet that they think is what really matters in their existence.
Well, what about the spirituality of people on Mars, the personnel within MDF? Are they Christian? Would you consider them Christian?
No, I would consider that they were fairly non-denominational. There was not no real discussion, at least from the personnel that I knew, around religion or spirituality per se. So you certainly have people who were raised in different environments among the soldiering units who might end up having some discussion around that, or conversation which may reflect a spiritual or religious belief system. But there really was no encouraged belief system or encouraged spirituality or encouraged religion. It was more absent than that in the situation we were at anyway.
So do you think you will ever get a pension from your services?
There will be a settlement at some point, yeah. So they owe me a pension, they owe me back pay, benefits. When all that is calculated out, I don't think I'm going to get the full dollar amount for that. I think there will be a settlement, and I'm fine with that. It's really more about the principle of it than it is about me getting every dime out of it. So,
because once they start doing this, they set a precedent so that other people will get it.
Yep.
So we basically
we're
doing it for them.
We want to set that precedent so that other people have a legal avenue. So we don't want to basically say, I'm only going to take every dime you owe me, and then screw yourself and screw everybody else in the future, because I think it's somehow more important to get every dime that they owe me than it is to compromise and just get a settlement. I'll take the settlement.
Do you think your team will ever release replicator technology?
It's a good question. It's not something that I've been tasked with personally, and unless I get tasked with it personally, it's not something that I'm going to develop. But we'll see.
If someone was actually called the United States Marine Corps and confirmed your status in the military, what would they say?
Probably a different, some form or another of non-admission, of neither can confirm nor deny. But what I would really say to that is, impersonating an officer is a felony, and we have no sense of humor about that in this country. And I've been doing this long enough that someone would have sent me a cease and desist letter if they thought that I was committing fraud at this point. So, stolen valor, no. Impersonating an officer, no. That's pounding rocks in Leavenworth.
So why are you just a captain? Shouldn't you be a major after 10 to 12 years of service?
Well, my 20-year tour of duty, I started out as an enlisted person, clawed my way up through the chain of command to sergeant major, and then got my commission and got to go to flight school. So I did not spend 10, 12 years of my tour as an officer. I spent, less than 3 years of my tour as an officer. So that's why I'm a captain.
Can you comment a little bit about MCC, which stands for what?
The Mars Colony Corporation. So Mars Colony Corporation is essentially contracts the MDF to defend the colonies. The MCC is the organizational structure under which the governors of the colonies form a collective corporation or sub-corporations in order to essentially have balance sheets so they know what their income is, what their outgo is, what their budgets are, so that colonies essentially are an experiment in financial solvency. So a colony that's successful makes a profit. Colonies that are not successful, how much it costs to feed, house, clothe, provide medical care to personnel becomes more expensive than what the colony can make. That makes it a failed colony. So the MCC is basically just a accounting and management system for the colonies to be financially accountable to themselves and to the larger organization. Now the MCC is underneath the umbrella of the ICC, but the ICC has a farther reach than just Mars itself. So the MCC is specifically responsible for things that are, within the colonies, on Mars itself, and for financial accounting for things that are on Mars. Whereas the ICC has a larger financial stake and responsibility in solar system-wide activity and not just activities on Earth or on Mars. I believe that there are citizens of the colonies who have voting rights, but there are also some of the colonies have tended towards slave labor or forced labor or low pay. In some cases they say, oh no, we are paying our laborers, but it costs, their housing costs this much, their food costs this much, their health care costs this much, so what we're paying them is eaten up by overhead costs, and that's how they can justify not handing someone, a check or some kind of credit system every month for what they're doing, and they essentially are keeping them enslaved. But on paper they're saying, oh no, we're taking care of them, so we're paying them, but they're not really.
Do you see a trend of banning slavery on Mars, outlawing it?
I think it's definitely the trend. The worker revolt, which I want to say is about 4 years ago, was a lot about that. I mean, was basically because these people who had been living under slave conditions got fed up. They'd had enough of it, and so there was a bit of a revolt. So I would say the future of the colonies is not slavery.
What can you tell us more about this worker revolt?
I don't know much other than that it started about 4-ish years ago, and that it all happened pretty quickly as far as when it started to go down. There was a series of explosions that blew up a few power plants, blew up a few industrial manufacturing plants, destroyed some train tunneling and so forth that blocked off certain areas and created some very defensible territories so that the workers who were engaging in an armed uprising could defend their territory. From what I understand, the MCC and the ICC has granted some of those colonies worker control or colonist control by basically saying, well, we don't really care what your system of individual government is, whether you're a governor controlling the whole system, or whether you want to decide that you're a worker collective, that everyone gets to have a vote and you're all going to figure out how you're going to share profits from the profit making scheme. We just have contracts that need to be fulfilled by the industrial manufacturing facilities. So as long as the worker colonists organizations were able to keep the quotas from the industrial side going, the MCC and the ICC are happy. So they don't really care about individual system of government. They're more concerned about making sure that their industrial contracts are met.
It almost seems a bit like a feudal system.
Yeah, it's not unlike a feudal system essentially, and it's certainly going through the growing pains of a feudal system. Which is, how we sort of go from serfdom and slavedom to worker systems and voting rights, and instead of just, royal families that get to vote.
So would you consider the ICC a branch of Darkfleet?
No, ICC is its own sort of existing entity that's made up of bankers and corporate members who are basically just the financial driving force behind everything. So they're the major makers of all the profits, and they're the spenders of the largest amounts of money. So because they're making most of the money, but it's mostly centered around bankers and corporate personnel. There's certainly competition and tensions between a lot of different organizations within covert military space program activities. It's everyone that cooperates a little more loosely than they do religiously. So there's definitely some competing, definitely some people who don't care for one another. And I mean, I knew some Navy guys back in Vietnam who used to talk about, how fun it was, at the time, the way it sort of inter-agency, inter-force military rivalries happen. So it was sort of a standard thing that they would get in their boat at night, go up the river, and try and steal as much stuff they could from the Army base supply depot or the Marine base supply depot or whatever, and see how much fuel or food they could basically, come back home with and say, look, we got a bunch of stuff. And then the Army guys would do the same thing, would try and, rob the supply unit from the Navy guys. And I mean, there was just a sort of competitiveness, about that, like, oh, we're going to take your stuff, and so that's the kind of thing that's not going away tomorrow. So there's always going to be a little bit of rivalry and competitiveness between people in different military agencies.
Do you see the MDF working with Donald Trump's Space Force?
I don't know that they're close enough to be able to work together at all. The MDF is a contractor that is specifically contracted with the defense of Martian space, of Martian land territory. So Space Force is closer to a terrestrial space defense agency, which will then also be answerable to U.S. Space Command. So U.S. Space Command is the command authority agency that will still be in charge of whatever Space Force operations is. So interestingly enough, Space Force will not be in charge of Space Force. U.S. Space Command will be in charge of Space Force.
Is Space Command also in charge of the USMC special section?
No, they're not in charge of. It's just that if you need something done, you go through the command agency, and then the command agency goes to the other branches or cooperating agencies and says, hey, we need to do this. So, they can issue orders that say, we need this done. Sending it to you because I want your personnel to do it, because our bureaucrats say that your personnel are the best qualified for this particular mission. But it will still be under the command structure of U.S. Space Command.
Seems like a lot of red tape up there.
Oh, there's a lot of red tape down here. So anyone who's been in the military knows what military red tape is about. It doesn't go away anywhere. There's just red tape everywhere you go.
Can you comment on how MCC headquarters was built?
I don't know anything about the way it was built, other than that it was built in the mid-1970s. That's about all I know.
And 150,000 feet below ground?
I don't know that it's that far. I mean, again, I haven't been to the deepest point. So, I mean, I've been in the places that I've been inside. I either was just inside the front door or down an elevator on a level that I couldn't tell you exactly how far down it was. So,
and how many people do you think will live on Mars?
well, like, at the time of the census, it was about 10 million, but know it's down from that some, but we don't know what right now because we have no official numbers on casualty rates, loss of life, collateral damage, people who've starved to death or have lost life support, and so they don't have enough food, water, oxygen. We just don't know. So I'd say we're probably still hovering around 9 million, but it could have gone as far down as into the 8 something million. I don't know. I don't think it's probably gone down that much, but we don't know what the exact numbers are right now.
That was all from the Workers' Revolt?
Yeah. So I mean, probably
Wow.
as many as 1 million people have maybe died. So it's a lot. Like it was a pretty rough spot. Like from what I understand, within the first few months, there was a lot of collateral damage. There was a lot of people that died, and a lot of it was from being cut off from food, water, resources. So there were people who were simply trapped and had no ability to get supply chains and starved to death. So
That must have hurt the profitability of the colony that year.
yeah, I'm sure in some cases that was leverage that workers managed to use against the governments, the governorships, in order to get some demands by saying, if we can starve out enough of your population, you're going to lose everything. So you might as well negotiate before everybody starves to death.
Would you want to get your blood DNA analyzed to prove that you're...
I mean, I could do that. There's no organization or company that does that right now that I would trust to do that, because so far all the DNA testing companies, you have to sign a waiver that basically gives them the ability to do whatever they want with your genome, and I'm not okay with that. So technically, if you do a swab for 21 and up or whatever it's called, or 21andMe or whatever the company is called, technically you have to sign a waiver that if they wanted to take your DNA from that swab and try and make a clone of you, they could, based on what you have to sign away. I mean, it's not saying that they are. I'm just saying I don't necessarily trust letting someone take my DNA sample that makes me sign a waiver that gives all of them all sorts of rights to my DNA. And I'm not sure what that would prove. If there was a reputable company that I felt like I could maintain control of my results and do that, I have no problem doing that. Just based on the fact that so many human beings are already hybrids, and have been for a really long time, I think we presume from looking at human genomes, and we think that there's a pure human genome when I don't know that there is. So how in the world does somebody who doesn't have access to extraterrestrial genomes tell you what's human DNA and what's ET DNA? Anyway, so it's just not, I'm not against it, but those are the reasons why I wouldn't just go to a mail-in company, and why I'm not sure that it would necessarily prove or disprove anything.
Can you comment a little bit about some of the classes that you offer?
Oh, sure. I'm teaching a psionics class right now, which is basically a class in self-mastery of mental techniques and of the mind. We've been doing a 2-day course locally where I live in Yelm, Washington. People can contact me via my website, which is www.earthcitizenconsulting.org. They can email me there, and we can put them on the mailing list so that they can get the information on when those are coming up. But we've been basically doing one a month since the beginning of the year, and it's $277 for a 2-day course. You just got to come to Yelm for it right now.
And will that be online? Can somebody say?
We've been talking about that, and I'm just not sure that I want to do that. So I kind of feel like I feel like I want to give my students a bit more one-on-one attention, and I also want to feel like that the people who are coming into my class are being screened a little bit by me in order to be given the information that I'm giving them. I don't necessarily just want to hand over the tools that I'm teaching people to every single person on the face of the earth. So at this point, I don't know. I'm undecided on whether we're going to do an online version or an online course. At this point, you got to come see me in person to take my class.
Okay. Well, do you have anything else you want to comment about while we're still here?
No, I barely got any sleep last night. I'm tired.
Thank you, Randy.
Thank you very much, James.
Please consider supporting Super Soldier Talk by purchasing your own Neo Meditation device. Your Neo Meditation device will help you reduce stress, integrate trauma, enhance intuition, enhance clairvoyance, and enhance creativity. Get yours now at www.neologicaltech.com.